history books that I came across when I moved to Damascus by Louise Fortune Hall. She had been the town historian for a very long period, and she did die in 2008. Her books held excellent documentation about the origins of the town from its earliest days when the Daniel Boone Trail brought the first settlers through the era of the railroad and the development of other industries, bringing it up to 1978. But my book would differ in that I wanted it to hold a lot of stories. I also wanted the book to be a resource for enjoying time in and around Damascus, so it's jam-packed with information. And I also wanted to give more visibility to some of the businesses and to other aspects of the town that some individuals are involved in that really help create the character of Damascus life. I had known the town historian, Louise Hall. In fact, I consulted with her for history on my own house when my house became 100 years old while I was living in it, and I put together a Christmas centennial celebration, and I wanted to have something to give my guests about the whole history of the house. And some of you came to that gathering, and the only one I can really remember is Sean O'Sullivan being there. I don't know if Sharon, you and Powell, you were gone. It was at Christmas. Yeah. I had also known one of Louise's daughters, Eleanor Hutton, who is an Emory person, and we'd been acquainted for some time. And both she and her sister were very, very helpful, and her brother, who I communicated with from a distance. They were really helpful in help getting me to create a full picture of this really extraordinary woman. The more I learned about her when I was researching for my book, the more I realized I needed to include enough information about her to spread appreciation for what she did for the town of Damascus. And as I began organizing the book, I knew Louise Fortune Hall needed a whole chapter to tell her story. And well before I finished writing the book, it became clear to me that I would be dedicating it to her memory. I chose these descriptive words of her in the dedication: archivist, ambassador, and heart of the Damascus community. And I'm going to read directly from the book here for just a bit. A diminutive woman who packed a big punch, she left a huge and valuable legacy. The bulk of her collected papers were given by her family to the Washington County Library for preservation. The archive is held at the Damascus Library now. It was for a time at Maine, but it's gone back to Damascus, and much of it can be viewed online. Neither of her books is still in print, but they still may have a half a dozen or so copies for $4 a piece at the Damascus Library, which the family donated for library fundraising. And those of you who were interested enough to take advantage of reading these books, you can read it at the Damascus Library in the conference room that is dedicated to her, where there's a portrait and some information, a little bit of information about her. Reminiscing about her earlier life, she would say, Damascus was a wonderful place to grow up. Her parents had a mini farm just a block off Main Street, which is Laurel Avenue, across from where the old mill now stands. They had chickens, rabbits, hogs, and 2 cows. Even as an adult, Louise continued to garden there, and a common sight was to see her pushing a wheelbarrow full of fertilizer through town on its way to the property. There are family stories that she sold chestnuts from her tree to the grocers, made apple butter in her big kettle the old-timey way, was a crafter of all sorts, did a little painting, was an expert on the flora and fauna of the region, and made home movies dating back to 1936. She also played piano and loved to sing. Her son Jack has a favorite story about his mother. While a college student studying the Russian language, he participated in a study tour sponsored by the National Science Foundation involving 4 weeks of advanced study in what was then known as the Soviet Union. The suggestion was made to the students that they take along small gifts for the Russian people. Jack remembers his mother's clever idea to send a dozen pairs of socks from the Damascus hosiery mill, where his father worked as an accountant. Although he was resistant to the idea of handing out socks on the streets of Moscow, he cooperated. Once he got there, he discovered his mother had printed little labels and sewn them into one of each pair of the socks, saying, Damascus Hosiery Mill, Virginia. Another story that continues to amuse Jack is that he and his mom once stuffed a possum she had found dead on the road. It interested her in part because of its unusual black color. After researching information about skinning and stuffing animals, they proceeded with their task. And according to Jack, it is still in excellent shape and odor-free. Working with the mouth, eyes, feet, and tail presented challenges, but in all cases, his mother came up with ways to resolve them, like using marbles for the eyes and a coat hanger to substitute for the bone in its tail, bending it gently to reproduce the typical possum tail curve. Last but not least, Louise was a legendary cook. She made layered date bars and cakes shaped like little lambs for all the children's birthdays, and she was especially known for her taffy, which she was still making into her 90s, despite it being an extremely strenuous task. Eleanor Hutton, her daughter, claims her mother probably gave away hundreds of pounds of this treat, and I included the recipe in the book. Until the final year of her life, Mrs. Hall could be seen walking to the post office every morning, eager to find more correspondence concerning the town. Many letters just continued to share the writer's good experiences while visiting Damascus. Louise held court on her porch with hikers such as Grandma Gatewood, who you'll hear about in a moment, and her collection includes a color photograph she herself took of Grandma Gatewood, and it's in the collection at the library. Other visitors wanted to benefit from her unequaled history of the town, and many times she took visitors up to the cemetery to search for their buried relatives. Her family emphasizes her serious commitment to community service and her good sense of humor. She served on the Town Council, Planning Commission, the Damascus Cemetery Committee, and the Washington County Library Board. She was a lifetime member and clerk treasurer of the Damascus Presbyterian Church. Her early interest in the Appalachian Trail is expressed in being a founding member of the Appalachian Trail Club, the chapter in this region, and as a board member of the community action agency People Incorporated, she was instrumental in starting Washington County's Head Start program in 1964, becoming the first teacher in the Damascus program. In addition to her lifetime interest in education, history, the arts, and scouting, she also loved to travel. Her daughters remember a trip to Florida in the 50s and one particular train trip to New York in the 40s on a train filled with servicemen when the family did some sightseeing and attended a New York Yankees game. Avid Yankee fans, Louise and her husband George made many trips to New York, especially those years when the team was in the World Series. In later life, Louise became a world traveler and vacationed in Europe, China, Japan, Singapore, Australia, Fiji, and Hawaii. Both during her life and after her death, Louise Fortune Hall was the recipient of many honors. She's included in Notable Women West of the Blue Ridge, a 2012 publication of the Daughters of the American Revolution. She is mentioned as town historian in Ron Fisher's Mountain Adventures Exploring the Appalachian Trail, published in 1998 by National Geographic, and also in articles written about Damascus that appeared in the Washington Post. Many trails lead to this small Virginia town, and the New York Times, Good Times at Backpacker's Paradise. Locally, in 1992, she was selected as regional leader at Emory and Henry's Charter Day ceremony. When her taffy recipe was printed in the 2008 cookbook, Grazing Along the Crooked Road, she made a comment about her 2 history books. "That's it," she said. "I'm not writing the 30 years up to 2008. Now, 6 years beyond that time, we hope she'll approve of this update. Before going on to Grandma Gatewood, second woman I wish to honor today, I will mention a few other chapters that I'm fond of in the book. There's one on Conarock Potter that some of you may know, potter and musician, Deborah Grimm. She is another pretty admirable mother whose 2 girls also do pottery in their mom's studio, and they also perform in their Yates family band. I call that chapter Creating Clay with Music because both are Deborah's lifeblood. The chapter on 2 Christmas traditions was one I enjoyed. Vernon Waters, he served as the Damascus Santa for 44 years, which meant that he was in the parade, and the day after the parade, he marched up and down Main Street looking for children to sit on his knee and help them look forward to Christmas. And he loved this role. He called himself Sanny. And in another chapter, I tell the story of, also Bill McKee, who is from Glade Spring. He's been serving as the Santa for 15 years now, and he does a wonderful job. In another chapter, I tell the story of Bill Neely, the man who crafted 3,000 instruments over a 30-year period. Both Bill and Vernon passed away a couple of months before the book went into print. And I'll share a little news about Dave Patrick. I think somebody mentioned, maybe in Joys and Concerns last week, that he passed away a week ago. Dave is probably the first person in Damascus that I met 22 years ago, when I moved back from Florida and started hiking regularly. The first time I went through Damascus, I stopped at Mount Rogers Outfitters when he had just opened the store in the early 90s. And it was very sparse in merchandise, but he had just finished through hiking the Appalachian Trail in 1990, and he committed to opening this shop so that hikers could restock, resupply, and replace worn-out equipment. Damascus Dave, as he is known, is truly a legend on the AT, in the AT community, and I'm really, really pleased that I was able to have him in my book to give tribute to the important person that he has been in Damascus. The 2 longest chapters in the book, of course, are on the Appalachian Trail and the Virginia Creeper Trail, and there's a wealth of information about each. I included a nice history on the Green Cove community because of its significance in the railroad years, and that wonderful depot is still serving bicyclists and other Virginia Creeper Trail users. I had the good fortune to meet Annette Good, the granddaughter of the first station master, appointed in 1914 when the depot opened. She came home from California last August for the 100th anniversary of the opening of the Green Cove Depot, and she gave me some very sweet anecdotes for the book. There is a good sketch of the origins of the AT and some good stories about the pioneering hikers. It is Grandma Gatewood, though, whose story as one of the first through hikers, the first female through hiker, that really has captivated me. And I was blessed with the publication a year ago by a Tampa Bay Times journalist, Ben Montgomery, who had access to her diaries and her journals and just wrote a phenomenal book on her and the AT in general. I highly recommend it. The book is called Grandma Gatewood's Walk. And Emma Rowena Caldwell Gatewood was an Ohio farmer's wife who birthed 11 children and achieved something that no one else in the world can claim. Most folks who have had much of an interest in the Appalachian Trail have heard of her, or at least have heard bits and pieces of her claim to fame. In 1955, at the age of 67, this determined woman became the very first through hiker of the AT by herself. A through hike is a term used for anyone who completes the entire 2,185 now miles of the Appalachian Trail within a 12-month period. Many other people hike it in sections, sometimes over a very long period of years. But, and I explain in the book how they are listed in an Appalachian Trail archive online, 2,000 milers. They all get credit for completing the trail, whether it was as a through hiker or a section hiker. But actually, before Grandma Gatewood, there were two other notable women who made Appalachian Trail history. Oh, thank you. Mary Kilpatrick hiked its entirety in 1939, but she did it in sections. And Mildred Norman Ryder Lamb, who actually accomplished her through hike 3 years before Grandma Gatewood, is less well known for several reasons, mostly because she did not hike alone, and she was not married to the man that she hiked with. And some theorize that making her hike more public would have been a bit scandalous at that time. But she eventually wed Dick Lamb. The marriage only lasted a year, and then she went on to make her own claim to fame as the Peace Pilgrim. Have any of you ever heard of her? She has a little book called Peace Pilgrim, Her Life and Works in Her Own Words. In 1953, this was the year after she completed the through hike, she did a coast-to-coast walk, which was the first of many of her pilgrimages that eventually added up to 25,000 miles of walking in her lifetime. In her book, she shares how the harmony she felt living her life walking was her special way of witnessing for peace. Unlike Grandma Gatewood's notoriety of being in her 60s at the time of her hike, these two women, Mildred and Mary, were both in their 20s when they did their historic hikes. So now I'm going to read a little bit from the book on Grandma Gatewood. This Ohio farmer's wife with 11 children and 23 grandchildren, was the 8th person and first woman to complete the trail solo. Emma Rowena Caldwell Gatewood, affectionately known as Grandma Gatewood, embarked on her journey in 1955 at age 67, wearing Keds, carrying only an army blanket, a raincoat, and a plastic shower curtain, all stuffed into a homemade bag slung over one shoulder. She had actually attempted the hike the year before, but had gotten hopelessly lost, and she abandoned her effort. After that first failure, she became more determined and knew she would try again. At 5 feet 2 inches tall, weighing 150 pounds, wearing false teeth, being near blind without her glasses, and not deterred by huge bunions, she one day gathered her necessities and once again walked away from home. It was some time before her family learned where she was, since it was not out of character for her to make sudden, unannounced departures without leaving a note. Carrying little food, she knew how to forage in the wild, and when necessary, she would find a town to purchase a few provisions. There were hungry times, but Good Samaritans, now called trail angels in the hiking community, would unexpectedly show up offering food, lodging, and transportation. Ben Montgomery, in his book, also places Emma Gatewood's endeavor into the context of several things: the social climate of the time, historical happenings in America and the world, and significant events like the 2 hurricanes that devastated the mid-Atlantic and New England states, impacting Emma's hike with torrential rains, causing flooding and tree blowdowns that obstructed the trail. Many of those who embraced her along the way are included in the narrative, as well as accounts of some who turned her away, fearing the bedraggled stranger who looked like a tramp. Time and again, she found herself during these early years of trail walkers in dramatic situations, some risky, others a bit amusing. She once crawled through barbed wire fencing following old blazes, unaware she was entering a radar station constructed by the Air Defense Command, part of a massive security effort during the Cold War. The Blue Ridge Parkway, it had been rerouted to the Blue Ridge Parkway. During her walk, journalists in Virginia were learning what Emma was attempting and began meeting up with her at points along the trail. Newspaper articles appeared in Roanoke and Waynesboro, and later there were headlines about her in newspapers all over the country, referring to the trail as appy. Grandma Gatewood held the same beliefs as most through hikers, that it takes more head than heel to do it. That's a quote. Regarding feet, reportedly hers grew from size 8.5 to 10, which is a common phenomenon among long-distance hikers. Her Keds were left behind in Damascus after getting a new pair of shoes from a man who lodged her overnight, and you can see those. Have you seen them, Emily? They're at Mount Rogers Outfitters. Dave Patrick encased them in a little box with a plexiglass cover to preserve them, and he has sort of a little sanctuary in there, some pictures of her, one of which is in the book, the picture that Louise Fortune Hall took. You can look at it later. Grandma repeated her hike twice more, a through hike in 1957 at age 75, and in 1963 section hiking, making her the very first person to complete the trail, 3 full hikes. She hiked numerous other long-distance trails before her health finally put a stop to her passion. 10 years after her third AT hike, she died at age 85. In honoring Emma, her Ohio congressman placed a long statement about her achievement into the June 1956 Congressional Record. In its conclusion, he said, "By this wonderful performance, Mrs. Emma Gatewood has achieved for herself a place with the heroes of the country. The Boston Post declared that she had demonstrated that the hardihood of the pioneer woman survives today. She was interviewed for an article in Sports Illustrated, published before she completed her first walk, and she made appearances on television, including The Groucho Marx Show and The Today Show with Dave Garroway. There is a 6-mile Grandma Gatewood Memorial Trail in Ohio dedicated to, quote, this vibrant woman and seasoned hiker. For Emma, it was all about fulfilling the dream that began 10 years before her hike, when she first learned of the trail in a National Geographic magazine in her doctor's office. There's an annual celebration hike along that trail that is named in her honor. Last year I was communicating with Ben Montgomery when I wrote the book, and he went to it last year. He told me he was going to try to come to Trail Days this year, but I haven't heard if he's going to be here. I am still in awe of Grandma Gatewood, who incidentally still has, at least at the writing of Ben Gatewood's book, 4 of her 11 children living. And Louise Fortune Hall, who died at age 97, is survived by her 3 children. The 2 daughters live here, and the son lives in Texas. My book is available here in our church library, and there are copies at all the libraries in the Washington County system. And if anyone who's interested, I do have a few copies back there. And I'm going to end there, but I did want to give a plug to Ed Davis, who said nothing about his book when he spoke with us a couple of weeks ago. He has a new book out called Collards, and I haven't seen it. I only know that it's got to be very funny.